Hi, I'm Evelyn,
And I'm Robert.
and we're talking about it.
So we have a guest today.
We do, a returning guest.
Ooh, somebody came back.
I know.
We didn't scare him away.
Go ahead and
The,
introduce yourself.
the return of the guest. Hi, I'm Tristan Miller. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing
That's
okay.
good.
Yeah. It's been a minute, but I'm glad to see you two are both making your way through the books.
Still doing it.
Yeah,
Still doing it.
Didn't get scared off.
I got close a few times.
I understand.
I'm gonna be right up front.
Mm.
This is not one of my favorite chapters.
Oh no.
It was hard for me to go through it. I mean, I've lost count how many times I've read it though. So
Okay, that's
That
fair.
being said, Tristan, why did you choose this?
because he knew it was my least favorite.
Yeah, and so I figured someone had to love it coming in to the so we had a nice fair balanced review of it. No, I really love this part of the story, and I think I talked a little bit about this last time I was on because I just missed the Council of Elrond by one chapter, and I love when they sit down and they yammer on and on about stuff that has no context for the story.
It was the one that challenged me.
Yes, it's understandable. It's specifically understandable. It's a particularly challenging chapter when you have only like The Hobbit and the previous book to base off anything, whereas like now coming as someone who has read the Silmarillion and some of the other books, it's
Right.
really interesting, and it's like a bunch of lore stuff, which I enjoy very much, but it is a deeply weird chapter
Yes.
that does not fit in any way. There's been a lot of like kind of talk amongst writers surrounding J.R.R. Tolkien's work. And one of the most interesting things about him as a writer is that he was not like a creative writer in any sense before
No.
any of this.
And he didn't follow any of the rules.
Precisely. Like later on, there's a chapter where a major event is in flashback, and you're like, why would you ever do that as a storyteller? And this is one of the chapters where you get of like, oh, so he just wanted to put C.S. Lewis in his book, and he created this big tree character, and because he wanted to talk about trees for like 20 pages or something.
So I actually liked that, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It was very high fantasy, and I love high fantasy. So I think that's why I really enjoyed it, is it really got into the high fantasy kind of, as well as I'm a biology nerd. So trees.
Yeah.
But part of it is also he gives us a lot of information dump, but it's not a complete dump.
Yeah.
As usual.
I mean, it's like, okay, you're not going to explain that any further?
Yeah. That's another reason I really enjoy this chapter, and I also really enjoyed the Tom Bombadil stuff of like, there's never any explanation really of like what happens to the Ent wives, where Ents come from really.
Yep.
Even in the supplemental material, they're just like, yeah, they're there. And I was putting together a puzzle, and I realized I enjoyed the trying to figure it out far more than the completed thing. And so for me, this is like a permanent puzzle, and I enjoy that feeling very much.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also like trees. I enjoy trees, and I like Treebeard as a character. I don't know why. I think he's very funny. Like he's
Yeah.
But it's but there's also I'll talk about this right now. There's an inconsistency. The first time we're told is that he's 14 feet tall. And then the next thing we know, he's got them both in each hand. That doesn't sound like somebody that's only 14 feet tall. And that's also how.
Well, remember, hobbits are what, like 2.5, 3 feet?
Yeah.
But the movies have him as like little doll figures on his shoulders.
It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I 14 feet. That's fair. I suppose, yeah, but they're like at this point, Merry and Pippin are about 3'8" because they make a fuss of it when they drink the ant draught and they grow a couple inches.
Yes.
And so they're around 4 foot, so that's 10 feet more. Yeah, in the movie, they did make him a lot bigger, which did always kind of bother me as a child because I'm like, listen, I know. But they took a lot of liberties actually with the character design because it's also, Treebeard is describing as like not having bark for skin explicitly. It's like this like actual
where you
human,
couldn't tell, yeah.
yeah, like almost humanish skin, which is like almost scarier. This weird homunculus of a tree and human hybrid, and you're like, what happened here? And nobody knows. The elves woke up trees and then they started talking, I guess.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I also like the amount of singing he does. I'm a big fan of the poems. Big fan of an old man who speaks too loudly and sings all the time, because in my heart of heart, I know that's who I am.
I will say that's been another challenge for me throughout these books, has just been all the songs. Like, I like them when they advance the plot or the character, but a lot of times it does not.
Yeah, not at all. I was like, so you like them 2% of the time.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I can remember reading my first time in high school too. I started skipping the songs.
Mm-hmm.
And also books that had really long forwards, I would skip those too.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, anything that was written in italics, I skipped. But I've learned better.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I also, again, I think I mentioned this last time, I mostly listen to these on the audiobook version.
Right.
And Robert Inglis, who narrates them, does a full song. He sings these things.
Yes.
And so I think I get a little bit more out of them. And then there was also this great radio production from the BBC that I listened to a lot as a kid. And they all sang the songs properly. And I think that really adds to it. When, you're looking and you're reading lyrics, it's a bit dry,
Yeah. I still have the cassette copy of the BBC.
Oh. Yeah, me too. I think I have it over there somewhere. Yeah, it's wonderful. That bum 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 bum. But yeah, and Ian Holm, who plays, rest in peace, who plays Bilbo, played Frodo in those, which is very nice.
Yes.
Nice bit of kismet. Anyhow.
Right. So, all right. So a little bit about Treebeard. So Tolkien wrote in a letter that idea for Treebeard came out of his disappointment during his school days.
Right.
When the trees in Macbeth didn't really march to war. So he wanted trees that marched to war.
I feel that.
And by gum, he got him.
And he got them. He also wrote in another letter, this is a quote, "The ants were either souls sent to inhabit trees, or else they slowly took on the likeness of trees, owing to their inborn love of trees."
Interesting.
So even he couldn't make up his mind.
That's pretty common with him.
Yeah.
I was about to say, so I know someone who's going to end up a tree.
Yeah.
Crystal.
if your soul transmuted you into a thing that you love so much, what do you think it would be?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
It's got to be either a polar bear or a shark.
Okay.
Polar bear or a shark?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I want to be a golden eagle.
A golden eagle, okay.
I want to be able to fly.
I
don't want to be a bald eagle because I don't want to be worshipped.
I think mine would end up being something silly like a can of Coca-Cola, and I'm just it's in my heart of hearts. I know I'm like, or a cup of coffee. I'm talking cup of coffee from 7-Eleven. Yeah, that's weird. That's interesting. I always assumed like that the ants were somehow linked to like when, you know, in the lore of the Silmarillion with the great song, that they were just kind of sung into existence at some point. But that's interesting that they might have just been souls floating around that like something so much that they just turned into trees. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and there's some, and somewhere else it's written about the fact that the ants, okay, so in the song that Treebeard sings to us, the ants are third after the dwarfs. But there was something I read somewhere else where the ants were actually the second creatures behind the elves. But the elves didn't teach them how to talk until after the dwarfs were in existence.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's like, oh.
They're like, oh, we need some tall folk to help outnumber them.
Oh, no. We need somebody not a dwarf to talk to.
Yeah, 100%. Or I like this idea of like, oh, I guess we're just doing anything now. The trees talk. Oh, we're gonna make a bunch of little people out of clay. Ooh, so we're just, everything's split.
Yeah. Well, and it's also hinted at a little bit here, but I always wondered if Old Man Willow was one of those.
I got that idea.
One of those ants have been so
just dormant.
Yeah, dormant for so long, and the reason and then also maybe the reason he's so crabby is because he might have left the herd to go look for the ant wives, and now he's just old Willow
He's
by
got
the side of the water.
Nobody to talk to.
No one to talk to.
Yeah. There's also the Huarns who show up a little, they're hinted at a little bit here, and then they show up a little bit later as well, which are the trees that have become slowly more alive. And I feel like it's sort of like also that could be an option. And that's very much the Macbeth thing of like at the end of the chapter, Pippin's like, holy cow.
Right.
Everything's moving. Criminy.
And then I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan, so this gives big Narnia vibes too.
Yes.
I definitely got a lot of Narnia vibes, and that's just, again, I love high fantasy, so that's just, I was really feeling that here.
Right. Well, and when you said something about, he just wanted to put C.S. Lewis in the book, the way he describes Treebeard's voice is the same way he describes C.S. Lewis's voice.
Okay. I knew that Treebeard was based off C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
I did know that.
Yeah. So.
Which I can't imagine was flattering at the time. So you've written me in the book, yes, and it's the most boring character in one of the strangest chapters. Is that correct? Yes.
Well, I mean, he kind of got revenge.
Well, and the character that just goes
about nothing.
Yeah, just say yes. I mean, even Pippin says something about how long that word is for yes and no.
Yeah.
So.
And going back to like why I chose this chapter as well, is like as a young person, I very much identified with Pippin and Mary in this because I was just like, come on. And then as listening to it for this, I really identified with Treebeard. I'm like, everyone just calm down for a second. Too much is happening.
Yeah, don't be so hasty.
Yeah, and now I get that joke. I did not last week when it was made to me. But yeah, I thought it was definitely really interesting seeing Mary and Pippin, who are these like high energy young characters, juxtaposed. Wow, I can't speak. How do you pronounce that word? Juxtaposed. That's how you pronounce it. With Treebeard, who's very slow, who's very ancient, very just calm and quiet. Well, not very quiet. Yeah, I thought the dynamic was really good.
Yeah.
But think about it. He hasn't had anything to talk to for how long?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, because the other ants don't want anything to do with it.
You need a towel?
Well, actually, the reason I keep saying that is I read that it's supposed to rhyme with ain't.
Is it?
Yeah, because that's the whole reason why he has that thing about an int is an int, int ain't. I have it written in my notes later on.
Interesting.
And,
So,
never heard that
yeah.
before. But yeah, I mean, probably like the last person to talk to is like Saruman, who's been wandering around, and then he dipped years ago.
Yeah.
So he's
Yeah.
like got nothing better to do. And I love there's the scene where they first meet him where he's like, he goes off about like, well, what are you doing on this like long word? And he's like, I'm sorry. What do you guys call the thing we're standing on? And Pippin's like, a hill?
Yes,
Oh,
hill.
And he's like, no, I don't like that name, but
I'm not a big fan. And I think it also sort of speaks to this idea of like, since he's been around since the formation of the entire planet, not just Middle Earth, but the entire planet of what is it, Arda, I think, or something like that,
Mhm.
that like, he can take a few minutes to say a word. He's been
Yeah.
around for millions of years.
Right. I mean, they live longer than the elves do.
Yeah, which is
yeah.
bonkers.
So, ready to start actually talking about the chapter now?
Yeah.
Oh, I suppose.
We'll jump into it.
Yeah.
So when we first see Merry and Pippin in this chapter, they're in these woods.
Yes.
And the woods feel stifling
Mhm.
and they're dark. And then what I particularly enjoy is that, I didn't write down which one, but one of them compares it to that old room in the great place of the Tooks.
Mm.
Yes. Yeah.
The place where great grandfather died.
Yeah.
Hasn't been changed since then. And I just thought it was really interesting that there was a place in a Took house that hobbits felt uncomfortable in. I mean, it says they haven't changed it since he died.
Yeah, that's so weird.
It's like,
Really creepy.
Yeah. Ooh. That is very strange. And the old Took died, I think, like hundreds of years ago.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
that's gotta be dusty.
Yeah.
Ooh. But yeah,
And then, as always, every time someone mentions about traveling toward the light, in my head I'm going, don't go in the
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, I don't think that's sunlight.
are they secretly dead? Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Well, I was thinking fire. I was thinking there was like
Oh.
going on.
Interesting. I mean, and to your point, there is fire going on in as much as the battle is being wrapped up.
Yeah,
They
it's
start
true.
burning them orc bodies.
Well, and then on the other side of the forest,
Mm-hmm.
they're pulling up trees and burning them
Oh, that's true.
to keep the war machine going.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely devastating.
but traveling the light, they end up at a stony face, side of a hill.
Mhm.
So it's like walking, thinking they're going to find something. All of a sudden, they find practically a cliff in front of them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And who do they discover at the cliff? This random tree man.
Well,
Treeman.
even before that, they're so eager to get to where they think light is that they don't notice that their cuts and their sores are being healed,
Yeah.
or that
Oh.
suddenly full of energy. And that's from just sipping the water.
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah. So what is really beautiful about this, going back into this whole knowing a little bit more than what's presented in Lord of the Rings, Fangorn is the last bit of trees, the last forest from, I can't remember the name of it, but there was a great forest that
Right.
covered from almost, I think, Gondor to where Rivendell is.
Mhm.
And it was, and so this is the last vestige of it. And so there's a lot of
Okay.
the like deep old magic, hence the water being as healing as it is and so forth.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's, if I remember correctly, Treebeard says this is the east end.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's the east end of what used to be.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, that gives you an idea of how huge this was.
Yeah.
He says at one point that a squirrel could go tree limb to limb
Yes.
from there to, I think, the West Sea or something. And I'm like,
Yeah,
that's
something like that.
Without ever touching the ground.
Yeah, I was like, that's a big wood.
Yep.
Or a big squirrel. Sorry.
No, see, I think a big squirrel would make the limbs bend over.
That's true.
And there we go, rabbit hole number 1. Okay,
Squirrel hole.
squirrel hole. But I don't know why it grabbed me this time. I never thought about this before. Again, Tolkien makes a deal about him having 7 toes.
Yeah.
Oh.
And now knowing that he, I mean, I always knew he was very, devout Catholic, but I know that, he translated Hebrew and he did a lot of stuff with the Old Testament. That 7 is
It's one of the numbers.
it's the
Yeah.
perfect number,
Mm-hmm.
in Hebrew.
Okay.
It's the perfect number, and so
Yeah, there's
might
2
be.
feet. 7 and 7 is 14, which is also how tall he is. It's very,
Ooh.
yeah. Yes. Yeah. One of my favorite moments out of this when they meet him is Pippin's like, well, I almost like the forest. And he goes, almost like feel like you like the forest. That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you. Off the bat, my man has jokes, which is, once again, one of the reasons I really enjoy this chapter.
I really liked that, where it's just like I was expecting something to happen, with some tension. It was like a D&D campaign where you're like, you're rolling for initiative yet? Like, it's
tense.
Yeah, it was tense for a minute.
Yeah.
But he even says it's just like, yeah, I'm kind of surprised you guys showed up here. Like, I the fact you guys are here, props to you, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just like, you guys came from a weird place, but yeah, this place is weird too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I also love how he's like, well, if I'd seen you before I'd heard you, I would have just thought you were an orc and squished you. And so good thing you guys won't shut up. Basically.
That's right. I knew you guys weren't orcs from you.
What do you talk?
You talked from your and that's interesting too. He's thinking about them going on and on and on.
Yep.
But I also like the way, I was trying to find it in my notes, I can't find it now, how Pippin is thinking in his head how to describe his eyes.
And I like that in the book it even says that years later he would still try to describe the first impression.
Right, and that was the quote I was going to read, was how he described them years later.
That's also going back to J.R.R. Tolkien not being a very good novelist, is like, well, that relieves any tension of Pippin dying ever.
True.
It's like watching the prequels and going, oh, I know Obi-Wan's gonna die later on. It's fine. There's no actual stakes here.
Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that until now. What are you doing, John Ronald?
Jack to his friends.
Yeah, the description of Treebeard is, I think, also intentionally vague. Once again, he seems to love having, once a book, there's a mystery that he will never explain and that baffles people. And I think it really bothers a lot of fans of the book, whereas I'm like, there's so many things in our world that we just kind of don't have an explanation for. And I think that's why he explicitly puts, there's at least one per book where you're just you don't get into it. We don't have time,
Which,
right.
I like that. I do like that mystery aspect, but I'm very surprised to hear that he doesn't go on to explain them later in, a appendices or something, because from what I've gathered, he's obsessed with explaining he's obsessed with explaining every single part of his world, and yet this doesn't get an explanation.
Yeah, because even his son Chris has a note somewhere about I've looked and looked and looked at all his piles of writings and
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, often as I'm finding out and following along the scholarly source is that often it wasn't until another scholar wrote him and said, "Okay, where did you get that?"
Mm-hmm.
Now he's got to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you explain that happen? He's got to come up with that.
I remember as well, which is interesting, because I remember there was a documented conversation between Tolkien and C.S. Lewis where he was like, okay, but why are there fauns in Narnia? And C.S. Lewis was just like, there just are. And like Tolkien stormed out, got very cross of like, you don't know why this happened in your world. And he's like, not really. It's mostly just allegorical, but
Yeah, it's like
And
I can see him being upset.
Yeah. Which is
but he could have he should have just said, "Oh, they represent you."
Yeah.
Like you got this big talking tree that talks for me.
I do think that Tolkien either consciously or subconsciously knew almost everything about the world he was creating,
Right.
but just didn't share it because he was kind of a jerk. Like, that's for me. I don't need you to.
Yeah. Because we'll get to that when they mention in Wives.
Okay.
Yeah, but not long after we meet, when we get that first song.
Yes.
Or poem, but it's about the naming of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we also hear again, which is pretty much come a trope in fantasy, is the power of names.
Mm-hmm.
But when their names for everything is like everything.
Yeah. Which really gave me Aragorn vibes, where it really and I know Aragorn was like Aragon vibes, where Aragon was highly influenced by Lord of the Rings, and how they do talk about the power of names, and how if you can figure out someone's actual true name, like in the creation language, like you can control them and you can change them. And that's kind of what I thought about, was that, where I feel like the author of Aragon dove a little bit further into that than this one, but it was still really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I know, funnily enough, that's a belief that the dwarves hold in Tolkien's universe as well. They all have Ori, and then you have in Dwarvish his name, and you don't give out that one unless you're like real tight.
Right.
Which is kind of
and then Patrick Rothfuss's whole fantasy world is all, the magic is all based on names. The first book is basically about this guy trying to learn the name of the wind so he can control the wind.
Oh, that's in the Belregard too.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of books about it.
Yeah. I think it comes from like, maybe it's Norse mythology. There's like some like real old one where the idea of the sacred names and you can control people.
Okay.
Yeah. And I also think what's really wonderful about this as well is Treebeard says, like, you call yourselves hobbits, you shouldn't just go around saying that. And he's
but you shouldn't be telling everybody that.
Yeah, it's really protective of these two little guys he just met.
He's like, you're breaking the rules here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if that's something C.S. Lewis might have.
You can't just go around. Which is maybe, I mean, they both go by their initials, so maybe that's something.
Yeah, true.
And but also the series that both you and me liked so much was So You Want to Be a Wizard.
Oh, true. That one's too is all about.
Yeah, and that the name is constantly changing as it is changing. So just same idea as Treebeard here.
It's by Diane Duane. It's incredible.
Okay, I'll have to take a peep at that.
If you like high fantasy, her stuff is high fantasy, but it involves science at the same time. So it's interesting.
Yeah, you have to know math in order to do magic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. I like that conceptually.
Send in the clowns.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to turn that alarm off.
I also think it's very interesting because with this first song, he kind of says that it's the elves taught it to him, right?
Right.
Which is, I think, interesting just conceptually that the elves would just go around going, okay, everybody, like a preschool teacher. So here's everything that exists in our world to a fun little song.
I mean, I like that. That's something I can see, like little intling children starting to sing.
Absolutely. I think it's also really cool that Treebeard already knows all these different languages because he's just been kicking around for so long.
Yeah.
Right.
And he can immediately talk to the hobbits.
Right.
There's not.
And it's here when he's talking about names. He says there are ants and ants, and there are ants and things that look like ants but ain't. And that's where I saw the little side note somewhere where that's supposed to be funny because they're supposed to rhyme.
Interesting.
So
yeah, it's certainly
so maybe in mid-century England they pronounced it ant.
Ant. Yeah, ant. There are ants and there are things that look like ants. It's also very fun because at one point he said the ents were kind of that trolls rather were made in mockery of the ents, much like the orcs were of the elves. And I'm like, that's a very interesting counterpoint and weird to think. There's this beautiful theme with the evil in Middle Earth where the evil cannot create of itself. It must take and corrupt. And I think that is such a beautiful rule to the world because of the fact that it kind of implies that, if you want to go slightly allegorical because he was a devout Catholic, Satan can't create of himself. He can only destroy and corrupt man and nature, which I think is a nice, absolutely beautiful concept.
And it's interesting that it talks about that here, but in another place, Tolkien talks about that orcs were created evil.
Yeah.
Because for him, he could not see somebody being unredeemed unless they were created unredeemable.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting.
Yeah. Very interesting.
And then all of a sudden, Treebeard goes, "What's Gandalf up to?"
Yeah, kind of a non sequitur.
Yeah.
Kind of imagine it.
Yeah, like Lewis is probably like, "Oh, maybe I should say something about Gandalf."
Yeah, I kind of see it as that. Of there's kind of probably an awkward pause of ooh, gosh, what do I talk about? We both know Gandalf, so
because everyone knows Gandalf.
Yes.
Yeah, he gets around.
But he also puts in that Gandalf was the only wizard that really cared about trees.
Yes.
I take umbrage with, because Radagast seems to like nature a heck of a lot.
Well, yeah, but I think was more into the animals.
Yeah, I suppose.
My only reference for Radagast is from the really bad Hobbit movies, so I'm going to save my judgment until I actually read about him.
Well, I mean, he's already showed up in Fellowship. He's the guy that tells Gandalf to go.
That's true. Yeah, he just show up briefly.
And can I tell you, that is all you get.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's not. Yeah, I mean.
Wait, there's not even further readings or anything.
I mean, there's some here and there. I think in Lost Tales and stuff, but
okay.
That's
and they also talked about this Council of Wizards, but we never know of the three.
Yeah, that's true.
There's 2 blue wizards, as well.
That's right.
That go off into the East, researching, trying to talk to the men of the East, and then are never heard of again.
Right.
And once again, that's another mystery of like,
Okay, sure.
yeah, you just never get any information about those two dudes. Ay. Anyway.
Yeah. And Gandalf calls Saruman that young Saruman who's so shaped orcs.
Yeah.
That young Saruman.
I like that because I mean I know from like watching the movies that he's obviously an older man as well.
Mm-hmm.
They talked about in this book. So like I feel like that was just really fun to hear Treebeard say.
100%. And it's really because he also calls Gandalf at one point young Master Gandalf, which I also really enjoy. And it's also this wonderful thing of like, because basically since the Ents are like the second or third born out of everything,
right?
Wizards didn't show up until the beginning of the Second Age after Sauron showed up,
right?
As like a so the idea of like the wizards having to show up and then like introduce themselves to people is very funny conceptually to me.
Hi, I'm a wizard. What's a
Yeah,
wizard?
exactly. It's like, well, what's that then? It's like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Oh, that sounds like sorcery to me. No. It's not sorcery.
No. Technically, I'm an angel, and that makes it okay.
That's right.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like they don't even call themselves wizards. They just let other people because they're like, it's a closely gunny.
Yep. Yep, 100%.
Yeah, and then talking about names is where then we get to what we were talking about earlier, where Treebeard asked, what do you call this that we're standing on? It's like, it's a hill.
Yeah.
That's a hasty word for something that's been around for so long.
Yeah.
Which is a beautiful sentiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also like how he says, like they go, we live in holes, and he goes, oh, well, that's very right and proper, isn't it? And I was just, like, he's so nicely condescending to these two folks.
Yeah.
And actually reading it this time made me think about this, that because we have such hasty words like trees and hill and stuff like that, that, I mean, especially in this day and age, a lot of people don't take them for anything other than a resource to be stripped of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you knew the history of the hill, if you knew the history of the...
Yeah. I specifically, I agree with that. And I specifically feel like that's a very American attitude to have, in as much as we're so young as a country. We don't have castles, so we don't like sit around going, oh, well, this battle was fought here that much.
Right.
Because when we showed up, anyone who would know that, we weren't so nice to them, shall we say.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
But for someone who lived around Yorktown, Virginia for a good part of his life.
That's
the colonial triangle.
The 13 original colonies.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yep.
And I grew up around Plymouth.
Oh. God bless both of you.
I would like to go on record, Plymouth Rock is just a rock. I got so mad when I saw it. I don't know why, but my what was I, 8, 9? My
second grade, whatever that.
Yeah, so I was like 8, and like my tiny mind made it up to be this amazing thing, and we go see it, and my dad's like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "It's just a rock," and I thought he was gonna pee himself. He was laughing so hard.
I said, "Don't you think it's amazing that they landed on a rock that already had carved into it the year they were going to land on?" He looks at me for a minute like, "Oh, you're just kidding."
Wonderful.
Right. So we keep going off the rabbit holes, but that's fun. But yeah, we also find out that truants are starting to grow sleepy.
Yes.
Which I don't blame them.
Just allowed themselves to basically become
just trees.
Big old trees.
Which plays into that idea that they might have been trees that a soul was put in. That they can readily, well, not readily, but will themselves back to being trees.
Yeah. If they're just No, I'm gonna go to sleep for like a few centuries, and honestly, that's a mood.
Yeah, 100%. I've sat on a couch and been like, can I just fuse into this somehow?
Like,
Just a light coma. That's all I need.
yeah, yeah.
For a couple of years.
Some of my kin look just like trees now.
Yeah.
Speaking of Family Tree, the comic, check it out. It's amazing. It's about people turning. Literally, it's a mystery about people turning into trees. That's what my brain.
That sounds very fun. That sounds really cool. And also, don't at this point they're talking about Lothlorien as well, right?
Yes.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and
how that name's been shortened.
Exactly.
Yes. But I love when they say it's like, has it been shortened out of haste, or is it because it's also shrinking and the magic is also dying? And I was like, oh, I had to take a second. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Like, it is.
I was a little quick.
Oh no.
Libation.
You're getting
I just
Got the vapors.
You got the vapors. Could you imagine if your name slowly got like reduced by one letter like every 20 years? Oh my gosh. That'd be so frightening.
And which letter would that be?
Ooh, would it go from beginning or end or ooh?
Can I have a vowel, please?
Well, that's like half the people in my life just call me Ev. Like, yeah, Evie.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Ev, that's
well,
it.
she's even got a friend that called you Evie.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was first I was Evelyn, then I was Evie, and then it was shortened to Ev. So yeah, that has happened to me.
Well, hopefully your magic's not dying. Hopefully
Right.
it'll be fun.
But the whole thing about Lothlorien too, Treebeard talks about, the elves fled into the far valleys and hid themselves.
Mm-hmm.
He's throwing shade.
Which is proper for a tree to do.
Yes. Boom.
But yeah, he's absolutely like these freaking elves, which they have such a bad attitude towards everybody. I don't blame them. Elves are so high and mighty all of the time.
And I think that if any elf ever heard him say these words, it will injure them to the quick. They make songs about days that will never come again.
Ooh, that's sad.
That's like a schoolyard burn.
And then we get another song.
Yay.
And all these places of old.
Mm-hmm.
When he's talking about places of old, he's talking about first age.
Yeah.
Because we're in the third age now?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Well, and then all of a sudden, he decides that he's going to bring Pippin and Mary to the house.
Yeah.
Very high hospitality. A lot of hospitality.
Well, so this is another thing I don't ever remember seriously thinking about this. He takes 70,000 strides
Inch strides.
to get there.
Yeah.
So I found somebody that had figured out the map.
Oh, thank you. I was running it. My mind was bad at it.
They said, okay, so a stride was probably 4 feet. And if he was walking at regular human pace, it would take him 9 hours to walk that far.
Whew.
And it would be 50.3 miles.
And he's singing the whole time.
No, he's telling them his whole name. No. Yes, but you're right. He's singing the whole time.
And these poor hobbits.
And at least his voice sounds like a bass woodwind instrument.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could you imagine me trying to sing for like an hour and a half? Just high pitched, just like.
Here, Evelyn, have a drink. But he also talks about, Saruman wandering around the woods,
Mm-hmm.
asking him about stuff and figuring out how to get through the woods from point A to point B.
Which isn't suspicious at all.
Yeah, but I mean, for him at the time it was. I mean, for Treebeard at the time it wasn't suspicious at all.
It was just some young kid being hasty.
I would say, but he does say, but he never shared that.
There's this really interesting arc with Saruman of like he used to wander around all the time being curious, and slowly as he became more susceptible to the corruption, he slowly isolated himself over in Orthanc.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting of like the beginning he was like all over the place. He even gets as far as Gondor and so forth. And then just slowly, he's just like, I don't care about that at all. I only care about the one thing, and it's ring making. And that's the only thing I care about.
Right. So I had a quote about Saruman from...
So I realize this is not a visual podcast, but I want you to know that it looked like he was playing Mario Kart trying to get his phone to work. Like, it was so much flipping.
Yeah, I took the picture in horizontal, but it doesn't want to stay in horizontal. That's the problem. All this technology wants to be so hasty. So it's from the book J.R.R. Tolkien, Arthur of the Century by Tom Shipley. And he says, what does Saruman stand for? He stands for certain things such as mechanical ingenuity, smithcraft development, engineering skills. He has caught not the dragon sickness associated with gold, but metal sickness associated with iron. Disease that starts as intellectual curiosity, develops an engineering skill, turns to greed and desire to dominate, corrupts further and further into hatred and contempt of the natural world, goes beyond any rational reason to use it and burn it down. Saruman's orcs start felling trees for furnaces that they don't even need. And by felling them just for fun, as Treebeard complains.
So what you're telling me is he's anti-industrial revolution.
Well, but we knew we knew that too. He thought, because he thought airplanes as an instrument of war was stupid.
Yeah, he hated that.
He said at one point there was nothing more evil on the face of the earth than the combustion engine. Yes. Like he's on that level of like we shouldn't. And so the fact that you're reading that off of a phone, the irony is
right. Well, yeah. I mean, my kid knows my book.
Yeah.
Could you imagine Tolkien in the modern era right now with all the technology we have? Did he ever say anything about us going to the moon? Because I know he was alive for that.
I don't know.
That's weird to think about, actually.
I wonder what he thought. I wonder just like, oh, okay, this is good.
But he also hand wrote everything.
Yeah.
And had somebody else type it up even.
That's true. Yeah. Be the guy in the coffee shop with like a feather pen, just hipstering it up.
That's very generous. I don't think he ever left his home.
He would be living in Hobbiton in New Zealand.
Yeah. I don't know if he would be. He slowly got this detest of the people that enjoyed his work so much. It's so interesting. He would hear about people like doing elvish weddings, and he's like, "That's disgusting! You filthy people!
Yeah.
That's not of God. Stop it!"
Well, and also in the '60s here in America, students were going around wearing Frodo Lives buttons.
Yeah,
which I actually have one in my collection.
Oh, really? That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I found it at a thrift store, and they had no idea what it was and what it meant.
Oh.
But the whole idea that this really sets up how much of a difference there is between Gandalf and Saruman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because Gandalf shares things, even if it's small things. Like he still shares.
Well, sometimes.
Well, right. Well, if it's like you really should not know this, like of course. But he's gonna like be like, oh, I saw a butterfly the other day that I think you would have liked. Like that kind of thing.
Right.
You want some of this good weed that I got here?
Want some tobacco weed?
Yeah, quote unquote. You want some long bottom, my dude? There is that really solid slam from Saruman at one point where he goes, the pipeweed has clouded your vision or something like that. He's like,
Yep.
so mean.
You're
a bum, Gandalf. You're a bum.
You stoner bum. Get off the couch and get a job.
Yeah, exactly. You're unemployed. You just hang out. What do you even do?
But for Treebeard, that was better than Saruman, who he even after it says, I think he was already beginning to turn to evil ways back then.
Oh, 100%. There's a lot of speculation about like when exactly, and I think it becomes pretty quick, to be honest. Which is there's this interesting thing as well. So at one point, I think Tolkien said like the only wizard to actually do the thing he was supposed to do was Gandalf. Because Saruman gets corrupted, Radagast just lives in Mirkwood and is never spoken to again, and then the two blue wizards fully disappear. So it's just Gandalf with the weight of the literal world on his shoulders.
Right. Yeah, because, I mean, there's so little about Radagast that in the Hobbit movie, they had to create this rabbit sled for him.
Yeah.
So he would be on the screen for like 10 more seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna pay someone to do his makeup and his for him to be on there for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
We're gonna use that.
But just thinking of like Saruman again, like that's something that is our weekly Harry Potter reference. Just thinking about Slytherin being the cunning and ambition, and how so many of those ambitious wizards do kind of come to nefarious deeds, where it's not all of them, where being ambitious does not make you evil, but ambition in the wrong direction can be the most evil.
Yeah.
Well, it's the love of power.
Yeah.
Comes from that ambition.
Right, yeah.
Or vice versa.
Yeah. That ambition for power. We're like, I'm a Slytherin, but I have an ambition to learn.
Don't believe it. So,
my ambition is to save animals.
okay, so Evelyn, how old are you?
28.
For 26 years, Evelyn has had this developing plot of being able to get into Fort Knox to steal all the gold.
I was what, 12?
Yeah.
And I came up with a foolproof idea that
Beautiful.
in the 50s, but not with modern technology.
And this was
fantastic.
before she saw Goldfinger
But why did I want all the gold?
to rule the world.
Yes, to rule the world. So that, why did I want to rule the world?
So you can turn animals into creations.
No.
Humans.
Well, yes, but that's to save the animals.
Power. That ain't no different than what Sauron does to the orcs.
No.
No, I'm just going to release the animals into civilization and just see what happens. Have them retake their land.
Listen, you're not wrong, but I am scared.
The polar bears are coming.
Oh, okay. So being from Minnesota as I am, the Pizzly bear, you're aware of this, yes?
Yes.
The fact that those animals were like in my neck of the woods was just deeply unsettling growing up. I was like, there was like a grizzly sighting a couple of times in my hometown, and we're not in the country whatsoever. And it's just like, man, we really goofed, huh? We need to let them have their space.
Right. Just recently, a friend of mine was talking about he had to drive in Maine. Mm-hmm. He said one of the first things he remembers his driver instructor telling him, Moose always has the right of way. I mean, he just put that on Facebook a couple of days ago. We were talking about something. So, all right, let's go. Let's return.
Yep.
There are only 3 remaining of the first Ents.
Yes.
There's only 3 left.
What a bummer.
And with Treebeard being one of them.
Yes. Which means they're hella old.
Yeah.
Like, they're literally old as dirt.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And then that makes him think of the Entwives.
Yes. Which I'll say real fast. It got me so curious that I decided that I would try my hardest to figure out if we hear of the Entwives again without getting any spoilers. I was just trying to figure out if we were going to like hear more about them because I'm just like, oh my God, what happened to the Entwives? And
But I love the way he goes, we lost the Entwives. Oh, I'm sorry, when they die. I didn't say they died.
Yeah.
We lost them and we can't find them. I don't know what.
Be a pastor. I hate it when people talk about, well, we lost grandma yesterday. In mine, I'm thinking, well, what did you do with her? But I hate that term.
Yeah.
Right.
Very metaphorical.
Yeah.
I'll say this if you want. You get a little bit more about the Entwives, and once again, in supplemental material.
Mm-hmm.
But this is it.
Yeah,
That's
that's
right.
exactly it. I looked up where more wives come in, and they're like, there's like this like random appendices that mentions them, and then apparently in like 2017, some guy claimed to have a written letter to his father where Tolkien said, "Here be Entwives," but a lot of people questioned the validity of it. So I would be curious into researching that further.
From my understanding, they got bored of the trees, which is understandable.
They just like the vegetables.
They liked the vegetables. They went to what became the Gladden Fields on the banks of Anduin and had a bunch of farms, and then they taught men agriculture, essentially.
Yeah.
And then that huge battle happened, and then they're never heard of again.
Yeah, the dark. Yeah, the Dark Lord. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of a spoiler, but basically Tolkien wrote when someone asked, he's like, I'm assuming they died.
Which is such a bummer.
Yeah, it's like,
In other words, I don't want to write about them anymore.
Leave me alone. Yeah. I like the idea. In my mind as a child, I always thought much like, was it you, Evelyn, that said that Old Man Willow? I think, actually, in my mind was like, oh, he was an Entwife that somehow got corrupted. And then they didn't know what to call him.
Yeah.
That they got all the way up to the Shire, because that whole wood has the same feel.
Right.
And that was always kind of where my mind went, but there's like absolutely no proof of that.
Right. I mean, and when you read the story about Tom Bombadil and other things, the reason he knows about Old Man Willow is because he got caught by Old Man Willow once. And when he was young. So we're talking about, I mean, real old. So that kind of might fit with, he called him old man because he was grumpy.
Yeah.
It was an old woman.
Yeah. Who's to say?
Who's to say? And then we get the Entmoot.
Yes.
This is the part that I dread reading. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And then we're told, oh, that's short.
Yep.
It's like, I mean, one of my favorite sayings I was taught by a seminary professor was, for God so loved the world, he did not send a committee.
I like that very much.
We say death by committee.
Death by committee.
one of my favorite moments within this Entmoot as well is like, they're like, okay, so Treebeard, like Treebeard finally comes back up to him because the hobbits are just off to the side. And he goes, okay, so we've decided. And so, what are we going to do? No, that you aren't orcs. That is what we've decided. And we're going to add your line to the song. And that's pretty much it. What are you guys doing? They're like banging our head on the wall. Can we please? And it's also fascinating as well, because at one point, Treebeard says, I'm not on anybody's side because no one's on my side.
Yeah, no one's entirely, I'm not entirely on anybody's side because no one's entirely on my side.
Precisely. And it's one of those things of like, that really puts into perspective why he's not necessarily taking as long as quickly as he might. Because, and Merry and Pippin have this urgency of like, our friends could literally be dying.
Yeah.
Please help.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was honestly expecting the Entmoot to be like the Council of Elrond. Like the second I'm really digging this chapter, and then they talk about this, and I'm like, oh god, here we go. I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
I mentally prepared myself, and it's just like, oh, okay.
All right, fine. Because it's mostly, from my recollection, Merry and Pippin hanging out and kind of overhearing it.
Yeah.
And then you get Quick Beam.
Right, and then you have like Treebeard kind of like translating a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
They're all like talking in their like in other languages.
Mm-hmm.
So,
in Entish.
Yeah.
Which I love this idea of it just like sounding like the creaking of trees and how unsettling that must be.
Oh yeah.
It's like, ooh.
Yeah.
Hey, Lord of the Rings is frightening and weird, guys. Have you ever thought about that? How weird Lord of the Rings is?
But then we get to, we've decided we're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
Quickly, much quicker than normal.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds right.
And but I love the line. Ents are not like hobbits who look more or less alike.
Racist.
More or less alike. But Pippin looks back and sees this grove of trees.
Mm-hmm. I love the image.
Yeah, and so it's not a bunch of trees that look like Treebeard. Hey, that one looks like an oak. That one looks like a pine tree. And so it really is interesting to think about that.
Yeah. I hope we get this visual in the movie. I'm not holding my breath.
I think we do.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are watching the extended versions.
I was going to say, which one are you?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, after we're done with each book, we watch the extended version and...
Good. Yeah, because there is a beautiful, absolutely frightening, once again, it's scary and weird to think about. Like, it's also like this weird, like it coming, I mean, plants are alive, but this idea, it's very common in horror tropes as well, of like plant life coming and consuming, which is also beautiful in a way of like, as you know, Evelyn, you want nature to take back over, which is correct. In
I'm
some
basically
way.
poison ivy.
And then there's also some other writings that something has to have power over rocks, and it's the Ents. When you think
Bark beats rock.
No, but
Paper does beat rock.
But I mean, what breaks a rock apart? The oak root that's been growing for 50 years.
Yeah.
That type of thing,
and water over thousands of years.
Yes. So we'll get a taste of that later on.
Okay. Because that's something Merry and Pippin kind of like talk about. They're like, how are these guys gonna get there?
Yeah.
And I was immediately thinking, like, did you see how he just climbed up the cliff? Like, vertical, like,
yeah,
just this vertical army of trees, like full Pirates of the Caribbean style, like.
Yeah.
100%. Oh, yeah, it's such a beautiful moment.
Yeah, and and to me, that's a great way to end the chapter. Is that? Dun, 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 we got another army on the way.
Yeah, it's like, all right, to war, guys. And they're like, what? And they're like, yep, here we go. And it's
Yep.
And they're just like, I'm sorry, okay. And they're just like hanging on for dear life.
There's also this beautiful moment, like they have this big rousing song and everyone's amped and they're like singing and they're chanting, and then slowly Treebeard just like quiets down and gets like kind of melancholy but resigned, and both Merry and Pippin are like, hey, so the energy just changed, what's up, dude? And he's like, oh, this might be the last time we ever do this. This might be the last of the ends, which is very sad to think about, of these things that have been around since the beginning of time, almost the beginning of the world at least, and this is their final hurrah, which is, I think, goes to the nature of why they kind of decided so quickly. I think they all kind of came to the realization of like, oh, got nothing left to lose, I guess.
Yeah. And I also wonder if they would have made that decision if it wasn't Saruman who had manipulated them to begin with.
Yeah, that's true. They've got some history there.
So.
They do. And he also, at one period, Treebeard says, Saruman, he is a neighbor, I cannot deny that. Whereas, like, kind of, it's like, well, he's already chopping down trees for no good reason. And Treebeard does say this thing that was very kind of kind to everybody, of like, he's like, I understand the need to chop trees down to like have fires and cook and stuff, but this is another thing entirely. He calls it orc work at one point, and I'm like, is that that seems derogatory. But I think largely the answer, like, okay, so if it's in Mordor, we don't really have to deal with it. That's so far away. That's none of our business. Oh, the Misty Mountains are completely overrun by orcs. They'll figure it out.
Right.
But this is like the immediate threat to them.
Exactly. It's so close. It's like if all of a sudden, I don't know, like I'm in New York, if New Jersey all of a sudden was making moves.
Especially, if they can go 50 miles in 9 hours walking speed, other than a running horse, I don't think anything would be quicker.
Yeah, it's true. And even a horse, that would be like a hard skate.
Again, this is why we don't have eagles.
I don't understand that one.
They're off to, if the eagles were available, but they're not available, so we don't.
Fine.
They're also like,
they're doing their own thing.
They're wild animals. They answer to no one. These eagles. I love that. Go ahead.
But Tolkien literally wrote them to literally get him out of a corner that he wrote, and it's just like he's writing that out so that it does not become a corner that he put himself in.
Yep, exactly. He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
I'll say this as well, of like, there is a bunch of stuff going on in the north, like there's a full-on war. Lothlorien is on fire during this point. Like the Lonely Mountain from The Hobbit is at war. Like it's not just
this has become global for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and so I think the Eagles are probably like dealing with some other stuff right now.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, but
I mean, they're intelligent creatures, and they would understand that the council is needed, and so they would send a representative, and they'd be like, "Hey, this journey is important," and they're like, "Oh, let's do this," and then just, I'm getting it still, but the more I read, the more I'm finding reasons for it to still work.
Sure. I also feel like I think that the only person that would have suggested sending a representative of the Eagle would have been Gandalf. And he literally was talking to King of the Eagles, and the King of the Eagles did drop him off at Rivendell and decided to not be involved.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that.
Like, why here is just like, here you go, buddy. I'm gonna go.
I'm out of here.
Hang out in my Carrick. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
All right. So we have been all over the place. With this,
Yeah,
but I like these conversations like this.
I do too.
Did
Very
this
good.
make you feel a little bit better about the chapter?
Yes,
Okay.
because I got to complain about it to at least two people who listened.
Well, a friend just texted me that they're starting to finally catch up and listen. So hi, Nikita, when you get here.
Hi.
Well, so anything else? You know what we forgot to do at the beginning?
Oh,
no.
and forget, I just chose not to mention
To
it.
share the prediction.
I was hoping no one would notice.
Well, we're here now.
Okay, but now,
Okay, so my predictions were that they would not meet Treebeard until the end of the episode, until the end of the chapter.
Wrong.
I also predicted that one of them would take a stab at him, which
Mhm.
they almost did. There was tension. And then my last one was, I can't remember what my last one was. That's why I kind of ignored it because I couldn't.
All right. So,
But leading up to this, I did want to do a reminder since it's been a couple episodes. I have the long-standing prediction that the second that we see Sam and Frodo again, like a chapter with them, that chapter, like Gollum's going to show up that chapter. Is a long-standing one I had, and I had a long-standing one, or not a one. I had a long-standing one about Gandalf too that I can't remember now. Yeah, I think I said that he was going to. Oh, I said he was going to show up. I'm predicting that he's going to show up, in the next chapter with Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli.
okay.
Yeah, so those are my. Oh, that's the one I made last time. So yeah, so that's my long-standing predictions for moving forward. That being said, the next chapter is The White Rider, and I'm going to predict that's Gandalf.
Okay.
You don't say.
What? So what are some of the other ones?
So some of the other ones, I hear White Rider, and I know. So am I allowed to predict this is going to be a switch of point of view? Am I allowed to make that prediction? Because the last two chapters were Merry and Pippin point of view. So am I allowed to say that this is not? So this chapter does not have them in it.
Okay, so somebody else could be the narrator type.
Right.
Okay.
And to make it so it's not kind of a cop out, I'll say Merry and Pippin are not going to show up at all in this chapter.
Okay.
First line, Merry and Pippin, no.
Until she finds out Pippin's the White Rider.
Yeah, exactly. And then third,
Pippin falls in a vat and gets magical powers and gets the ring and becomes an overlord. That's the rest of the book.
He becomes the Orange Wizard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a third prediction right now because I feel like White Rider is a little straightforward, where it's going to be Gandalf and it's going to be a change of narrator. So I guess can I change that to two predictions then? It's going to be a change of narrator, and Merry and Pippin are not going to show up at all in this chapter.
Okay.
Okay.
And then Gandalf is the White Rider.
And Gandalf is White Rider. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll see what happens.
All right.
Yeah, of
Well, thank you for joining us on this
course.
whole adventure.
Yeah, happy to. I hope I shared a little bit more of the Treebeard love.
Yes.
For sure.
My whole family is just gaga over this long-winded tree. Growing up, he was a family favorite, except for my dad, who's like, ugh.
Well, yeah. Well. Recently, Evelyn at the vet office had.
Oh, that's true. I wanted to mention this. So I have a new job. I am a vet receptionist and assistant, and we had 3 kittens come in: Canary, Pippin, and Treebeard.
Oh, that's very sweet.
And I kind of looked at the owner. I'm like, this is from Lord of the Rings, isn't it? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, I love it.
That's very good. That's so positive.
But she was so upset with some of her coworkers who didn't get the references.
They did not get the reference at all. They're just like, Treebeard, that's got to be from something. I'm like, it's Lord of the Rings. And they're like, I guess. I'm like, okay, sure. Even I knew that before I read these books.
Uh-huh.
Right.
That Treebeard was Lord of the Rings.
All right. So if we've got everything done,
So Tristan, where can we find you?
Oh, sure. I have a website, tristanjmiller.com. I do a weekly humor column now at tristanjmiller.substack.com, and you can check that out. I promise it's at least moderately funny. And my Twitter is at TristanJMiller1. I'm trying to keep it consistent, keep the brand strong. Twitter is the thing I use the most, so if you want to interact with me, go there.
okay.
Sounds good.
And
Yeah,
you'll have that in all the notes too.
Yes,
for the
I have it in
episode.
all the notes for the episode.
super.
Right.
All right. So if there's nothing else, I've been Evelyn,
And I've been Robert.
and we're talking about it.